Hello, today we're back with Berlin Alexanderplatz, and we're talking about episodes 11 and 12. Um, in these episodes, Franz decides that he wants to get back into the street scene, into Pum's gang again, um, and he begins participating in that again. They're all kind of vexed as to why he wants to do that. But I think the reason he wants to do it is because he wants to be self-sufficient. He keeps having this drive towards self-reliance that keeps getting hamstrung over and over again. And so he goes and he tells Mitza that he has money now and he's able to give her money, and she kind of rejects this whole idea, which confuses him. And it kind of seems like she doesn't want him to be self-reliant. She's kind of cutting him off, and she wants to be the one that he depends on, in a sense. So he keeps doing this business with them. He decides he wants to introduce Mitza to his to Pum's gang and to his bar friends. But before that, Reinhold meets her. He's waiting for her in the stairs of their flat, and he kind of has this interlude with her where he kind of in a weird way comes onto her, but makes kind of a secret meeting between them that she's not going to tell Franz about, and kind of creates a deceit between them. He takes her to the bar.
Franz takes her to the bar.
What?
Franz takes her to the bar.
Right, Franz takes her to the bar.
Yeah.
I'm getting confused now. The first episode we're talking about. So he, I can't remember now. Do you remember?
Franz takes her to the bar, and as she walks in, this little boy with a cap pistol is shooting at her.
No.
Says, "Why didn't you?" No,
Oh.
No, that's later.
After she meets Reinhold, she is all confused and discombobulated, and she goes to a bar and goes into the phone booth, and I think she's about to call Ava.
Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, she's about to call Ava probably and like tell her what's going on, but she decides not to, thereby kind of keeping it a secret. And the boy, he shoots her, and he says, "You're already dead. Why don't you lie down?" And she says, "You never told me the rules." Yeah, that's
exactly. Yes.
That's a part that I was forgetting about. There's a bunch of parts that, like, in trying to put a summary to this.
Yes. No. It's very, very difficult to summarize.
Yeah.
We could just start talking about it, I think, and it'll come out.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, why don't you give me your impressions, and then
I found
light up.
episode 11 the most intense of all of them. It took me almost 2 hours to watch the 1 hour show. And the most involving, the most intense for me. I'll try to explain that. The Franz and even Reinhold and certainly Merck are basically reactive characters. They're reacting to stimuli. And Eva is the steadiest, most consistent character. She has this. You have this sense that she understands what's going on around her and her place in it. She knows how much danger there is, and she just tries to keep a level head and keep going. Mitza, who Franz is named Mitza. If we knew German, maybe we could figure this out. But Franz named her Mitza. I think her given name is Sonia. She's a completely different kind of character.
Well, he names
She
her.
is generating.
He names her Mary, and then they start calling her Mitza as a
Thank
nickname. You. Yeah.
She is a completely different kind of character. She is not only reactive, she generates this energy. The actress is amazing because she has the job as an actress of bringing a kind of light and spontaneity into this story, into this world. And she's completely sincere. Several times it's mentioned that as fresh and innocent as she is, she's also serious. And when we say innocent, she's a prostitute. You know, she's good at what she does. She's good at charming men. And she does this consciously. But a light just comes out of her, the way she behaves, what she wants. She loves Franz. But she comes back from this. Let me keep going on that. Her movements, if you just watch it for her movements, and sometimes I replayed things and watched her move, are completely original. In the episode, in that episode, she's faced with a kind of horrific absurdity. Franz has hidden Reinhold in the bed, and in his apartment with Mitza, he's hidden Reinhold under the covers because he wants Reinhold to see a pure woman, a wonderful woman, because Reinhold, in Franz's mind, never has, and completely unaware of how dangerous and empty a person Reinhold is. And Mitza comes home, and her meeting with her benefactor, he wasn't there. His nephew was there. His nephew was young, was enchanted with her, and she got infatuated with him, and they made love, and she says, I love him. And Franz goes out of his mind. And he beats her, and Reinhold pulls it off her and stops him from killing her. And the landlady's watching. And then she realizes Reinhold's there. What's it? He's been in the bed. What is this? And she starts to scream. And this scream has such a power that it backs off Reinhold, it backs off Franz. She's just screaming. They don't know what to do with it. I mean, she's screaming right from hell. And I mean, it's really a point in this whole saga where somebody has looked around, has seen what she's seeing, and just screams. None of them have the intellectual equipment to try to make any kind of sense of it, except maybe Eva. Eva knows what she's gotten into. But they're all flying on instruments. But she has seen something that to her eyes is terrible. Franz says, why would he bring this man? And you see from the way Reinhold is being photographed that he is the devil. Not the devil, not Satan. He hasn't got that stature, but he is one of the minions, emphatically. He sees something innocent. He wants to soil it or kill it. And so you have this incredible performance of this young woman, this actress. And the whole story has come to this enactment. Franz, in the same apartment where he killed Ida, 11 episodes down the line, and if he wasn't stopped, he would have killed Mitzi. And then this very strangely magical, she sees that he has gotten the job not because he wants to sell her, which is a phrase she uses, "You're not going to sell me," but because he wants to be, as you said, self-sufficient. And she suddenly gets that. And it's her idea to go to the bar, I believe. And we sense that she is in terrible danger. And as we just spoke, when she tries to call probably Eva, and she steps into the bar, and the boy shoots her with his cap pistol and says, "Why aren't you dead?" And then you know what's going to happen when that happens. But she and Franz go to the country. There's kind of an open air restaurant with a lot of children, a lot of it's looks like a wonderful park, a natural park. And there's a waitress who is old enough to be her mother, probably just barely, has her own dignity and beauty, and she's looking at Mitza, and she's horrified. And she says, "What has happened to her?" Just to herself. They play, Franz and Mitza. They go to the spot in the woods where they played Blind Man's Buff, and Franz had fallen down. And now she's all bloodied up from the beating he gave her. But she's happy. And she dances around, and it's this moment of pure happiness. And she is saying to him, "I'll protect you. I know it. I will protect you." Now, when the first time she sees Reinhold, when he kind of ambushes her in the stairwell early in the episode, the voice, as I'm calling it in my notes, comes on and says, "Look at his face. It's the most important face you'll ever see." And at that point, we know that Reinhold's face, I know anyway, Reinhold's face is the face of death for Mitza. But at the end of episode 11, they've gone to a space of innocence. I mean, she is a prostitute, he's a pimp. They're living this sordid life, and yet innocent. And she says, "I'll protect you. I know it." And it makes me afraid for her. And then the next episode, kind of, and as I said to you before, it took me 2 hours to watch that. I played some scenes over and over again. It wasn't a bummer. It was exhausting and emotional and intense. But and even though I knew I had a sense of what was going to happen now. It still, that shining moment was that shining moment. The way I look at things, I have a belief that some moments are invulnerable. They can't be ruined, and they keep existing in time. However that sounds to whomever hears it, and that moment that they achieve, Franz and Mitza, at the end of the episode, is such a moment. And to have known a moment like that, even after great pain and suffering and even horror on her part, and horror on Franz, not in this episode but before, to have known a moment like that is to have lived. It is worth a life, and it ends on that moment, and what's the title of the next one, and we've seen in the previous episode, it ended with the phrase, "The serpent in the soul of the serpent." And the title of the next one, of 12, is "The serpent in the soul of the serpent," or something like that. and then you are brought to the inevitable place where two things happen that shocked me, and yet, as I look back, they were kind of inevitable, where Reinhold blackmails Merck into luring Mita back to that park. And Merck is an interesting character in all this, because at first, early on, he seems sane, like Eva. He seems balanced. And then you find out gradually that he's part of a criminal gang. And you see he's weak. You saw that in the last episode when they were talking about France, he and somebody else. And to me, if I was going to make us look at it sociologically, he is in a funny way the classic liberal. He thinks well of himself, basically, and he acts expediently, and he's not strong. He lets Merck ambush Mita, and I couldn't look at it. I had to fast forward that part of it. I knew what was going to happen. Like, I didn't want to see Mita get killed, and I fast forwarded through it. On my screen, I could see what was happening frame by frame as I'm fast forwarding, so I was watching it, but I couldn't. It's rare that something is so intense for me that I can't look at it, but that's what happened on this one. And so, and going back to the chapter 11, there's a point where, before Franz is hiding Reinhold in the bed, where Franz is with Reinhold and they're talking. Reinhold just doesn't understand this guy, and at the same time is obsessed with him. Franz, in several places, called Reinhold my friend. And then suddenly Franz wants to go dancing. And they're in the bar, and it's Eva is there, and the voice says, Franz is in love right now with two people, with Mita, who isn't present at the bar, and Reinhold. So it's Franz's involvement with the angel, which Mita definitely is, and the devil, which Reinhold definitely is. And the interesting thing about Reinhold, for me, is that the devil's quality in this piece is emptiness. This is a totally empty man who needs to destroy what's not empty. So as you can see, it turned my head around. I hope I've been making sense. Where are you with it?
Yeah, so you didn't see the part where he shows her his tattoo, where Reinhold shows her his tattoo.
I didn't. I saw it, but I didn't stop there. You know, I was fast forwarding, and not very fast. I mean, I was going frame by frame kind of thing. But tell me about it.
There's a lot, like, in that whole interaction before he kills her that is pretty meaningful. And he has a tattoo of an anvil, and he says, "This is my family tattoo." And he says something like, "You can lie down on it," and he says you can lie down on the anvil, and he's comparing himself to an anvil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I think all of these people represent archetypes in Franz's spiritual progression, like this whole thing that he's going through. And one of the things that kind of tipped me off to that was I knew I had heard the name Bast before, his landlord, right, Mrs. Bast, and so I looked up the name Bast because I never heard it outside of this one place before. And Bast is the cat god in Egypt, and it's the and it's the god of, it's like a protector god. It's a it's a god of protection, and yeah, it's like a cat that kind of watches and protects. And I think that each one of these people kind of represents that. And the problem is with Franz is that he keeps leaning on other people to survive, and he keeps blaming other people for his own choices. And he hasn't understood yet. He hasn't found that place within himself, that place of stillness and solidity. He hasn't found that Christos in his own divine fragment inside of himself that he can lean on. He keeps looking outward at things and trying to grab a hold of things instead of looking at the thing, like the one thing, and dealing with that. And I kept thinking about a butterfly and a cocoon, and how when we first see Franz, he's leaving jail, and I kept thinking of the prison as a kind of cocoon, and how when you, like, let's say you're walking through the forest and you see a cocoon opening and you see the butterfly kind of struggling to get out of this cocoon, maybe your first instinct would be to, I'll help him out and I'll open the cocoon for this butterfly. But it's an integral part of that butterfly's existence that it struggles out of that cocoon, because it builds up strength through the opening of the cocoon, right? It won't survive if it doesn't go through that struggle, right? And I think that that's kind of comparable to what's going on with Franz. And I more and more look at Reinhold not as an evil influence in his life, but as a kind of anvil that's kind of hammering at him. And because he's depending so much on Mitza, even though he's struggling not to, he's trying to be self-sufficient. But even in his own, like, going out and making money for himself, he comes home and tries to give it to her, and she keeps telling him she's going to protect him, and she doesn't really want him to support her. She just wants him to be under her wing all the time, right? And I think that when she tells him about falling in love with this guy, I think the decision has already made by Franz's real self, that he might not be conscious of, but his divine self, that I got to get rid of this broad. Like, this isn't healthy for me. This isn't good for me in a million different ways. And really the integral difference, see, he meets the same situation that he had with Ida, right? So he's on that same, he's kind of on that circle we were talking about last time, and he's coming back up, but he's meeting that same point on the other side of the circle, the same situation, but he's meeting it on an ascending point, where the integral difference between the two situations is that Ida, he drags back into the room and kills her, but with Mitza, he's like, get the hell out of here. He tells her over and over and over again to get the hell out of here, and to just leave, right? Which is what, I mean, if you're in that situation where a woman is freaking out, I think the best decision is you to just split and fucking run out of the house. But he's, this is his little zone, and this is his pad, and he's not, he's like, get out of here. She won't leave. And then I think he does try to leave, and she drags him back, and she keeps grabbing him and holding him and everything. And that scene, like, yeah, man, that yelling is very genuine. And I think the real high point of that scene, or low point, is when he starts yelling as well. He starts screaming
Yes,
as well,
yes.
and they're both on the
And
floor,
rolling on
and
the
they're just
floor.
like in their agony, and together, it's like this point of like, even though they're in conflict, they're in the same they're at the same level and in the same place, and they're, like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do in this situation, and and that Mrs. Bast standing there and not doing
Mm-hmm.
anything, I think really plays into that kind of, this kind of mythological figure that's just like their only role is to like provide a setting for this to happen, and be a
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Interesting.
a kind of kind of like the moon is like orbiting around this,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't really interfere, but it's there, and
And,
it,
and Mrs. Bask is a little old lady.
yeah.
These are younger people with capable of great force. There's nothing
Yeah.
she could do.
So the decision, I think, is already made by France, that she's got to split. Like, she's got to get out of his
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, and his real genuine self has made that decision, but he keeps backsliding, and just sliding away from his own real self, and that's his problem. I mean, it's the problem of everybody that has a personality, is that they keep
Mm-hmm.
sliding away from it, in a sense. And that's really, was really confirmed to me when he does bring her to the bar after they've made up and everything, and he brings her to the bar, and he
Mm-hmm.
says, I wanted to bring her here before she dies. Like,
Yes,
it's
yes.
it's pretty, you know he doesn't know he doesn't consciously know this decision that's been made, and
Mm-hmm.
she
Mm-hmm.
she should have split, um, and in a weird way, her real self knows that she's gonna die too,
How
and
do you mean that?
like, she's totally unconscious of what she's doing, in a way that a lot of women are, a way that a lot of men are too. But I think women take it to kind of another level, where
Mm-hmm.
they enact entire scenarios without being conscious that they're without consciously doing it. That's just
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. But so I think that Reinhold is the tool for this occurring. Like, this has to occur in Franz's life, and that's why Reinhold keeps. Well, you didn't watch that part, but at the end, he's like, you should leave, Franz. He'll have something to whine about for the next week. And I think he
Mm-hmm.
says that
Mm-hmm.
before too, when he's at Poom's office. He's talking about, this guy just wallowing in his shit, and
Right, right,
like,
right.
so Reinhold's not a sympathetic character, but he's just more of a. He has his own personality, but he also has this kind of archetypal role, and
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of like a tool of this awakening of France. Not just in this situation, but the situation with where he loses his arm,
Mm-hmm.
and he keeps talking about also, going back to the Salvation Army, and how France should be sitting in the sinner's
Yes,
chair,
on the sinner's bench.
the sinner's
Mm-hmm.
bench, and France also talks about that too. That he belong on the sinner's bench, and and I think that that's very symbolic too. So yeah, I still, like, I can't get a real handle on Mech, and what his whole role is. He seems to be also kind of like, all these people have kind of like, it's like they're there for France,
Mm-hmm.
again, like Ava, Herbert, Mac, poems, even, you know, like all of these different characters are
Mm-hmm.
kind of a they're they're actors or principals in the universe at a personal level for France, but also at a kind of universal level for humanity or life in general. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Yes.
and I and it continues to get more occult, and there's little signals that and little symbols too in the whole narrative that really that are kind of deeply occult, and I don't think would be picked up by most people. And again, I go back to Doblin and just what
Mm-hmm.
an interesting guy this is. And I just wanted to read a little bit from the Wikipedia about Doblin.
Okay.
Um, so I'm just going to start from 1940. There's a really interesting passage here. So in 1940, age 62, Doblin was again uprooted by the. He had moved to France after leaving Germany, and
Mm-hmm.
but then they invade France, and he's got a split there too. They had called it asphalt
Right.
literature. They kind of classified it
Mm-hmm.
as asphalt literature, and it doesn't say anything about him being specifically targeted by them. I think he just didn't like the repression and the lack
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
artistic freedom. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
Dublin was again uprooted by the German invasion in France and spent weeks in a refugee camp in Mende. During this time, he began attending Mass at the cathedral in Mende, taking a turn towards Christianity that would culminate in his religious conversion the following year. On the
Huh.
3rd September 1940, his family boarded a ship to Lisbon, reaching New York 6 days later. In October, they moved to Los Angeles. Doblin worked briefly for Metro Goldwyn Mayer, writing screenplays for $100 a week, but his contract expired in October 1941 and was not renewed, despite the interventions of Thomas Mann and others. He and his family were baptized as Roman Catholics in Hollywood's Blessed Sacrament Church on the 30th of November
Mm-hmm.
1941, which I just
Mm-hmm.
thought was really interesting that this guy
Yes.
converts to Catholicism, and it kind of explains why his contract expired and wasn't renewed. And I So then it goes on here. Doblin completed work on this book he wrote November 1918 in the spring of 1943, but was unable to find a publisher. The only work of his that was published in Germany during his American exile was a private printing of these two books. Doblin was embittered by his isolation and setbacks in exile, drawing a strong distinction between his own situation and that of more successful writers, less suppressed by material concerns, such as Leon Feuchtwanger and Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann is like another one of the kind of giants of 20th century German
Yes. Yes.
literature. In honor of his 65th
Yes.
birthday, Helene Wiegel, who I've never heard of, organized a party on 14th August 1943 in Santa Monica. In attendance were Thomas Mann, Franz Werfel, Leon Feuchtwanger, Bertolt Brecht,
Wow.
among others. Heinrich Mann gave a speech. Fritz Kortner, Peter Lorre, and Alexander Granach read aloud from Doblin's works, and he was presented with notes of congratulation and praise from Brecht, Max Horkheimer, and Alfred Polgar, among others. Compositions by Hans Eisler were performed, and Blandine Ebinger sang Berlin chansons. Yet the festivities were dampened when Doblin gave a speech in which he mentioned his conversion to Catholicism. The religious moral tone proved alienating and fell on unsympathetic ears. But it just gives a kind of. I mean, this guy is really respected by the other Germans
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Hollywood. Like they know what a giant this guy is and how amazing he is. Um, and but he's in this giant conflict between his own, his growing up as Jewish and being in that milieu, and then he's got some kind of weird trip where he converts to Catholicism in 1940, and converts his entire family to Catholicism, and of all places, Hollywood's Blessed Sacrament Church.
Yes, really.
And I think there's a whole, and it plays out more over the next episodes. There's this whole conflict in Dublin between the way that I would
the
phrase
Salvation
it.
Army really makes sense.
The way that I would phrase it is
between
Semitism and Aryanism, between like the lunar and the solar, between materialism and spiritualism, and it plays out more and more in the next episodes that we watch, because and the guy just seems like he's a deeply intelligent guy, and he writes all these books he writes books that are just about spirituality, and deep books on like he writes this book Manas, and Manas means mind in Sanskrit, and it's something that like we study all the time in theosophy, and there's a higher Manas and a lower Manas, and it's kind of a higher mind and a lower mind, and that's really part of what's going on in Berlin Alexanderplatz. Like you see Franz dealing with this, he keeps trying to get it together, and he does have this real moral core to him, this real goodness to him, as Mech says in this episode. He's a really good guy. This is a good person, but he's also got this real he's being drawn down by an environment that condones sin, that is telling him that not to repress yourself, to put it into Freudian terms, that the repression of lust is unhealthful. But the truth is that when you indulge in your lusts, it doesn't make them go away. It just makes them wax stronger. Right. And so setting this in Weimar as it is really and when I was growing up, it was the same thing. Like, it was like, if you're not getting laid all the time, then you're not healthy. Like that's totally like the way that's the way I was raised, not like consciously by my parents, but everything around me was telling me that, right? And you should indulge. There's nothing wrong with indulging in your, whatever, like drinking or drugs or sex or all of these things.
No.
And
you're right. That was sort of the atmosphere, not in a sinister way, not even in a kind of I'm looking for a word, not finding it, but not in a sinister way, but just it was kind of an assumption in the environment.
Yeah,
that everybody shared without taking responsibility for.
I disagree. I think it was intentional, and I think it weakens people, and it makes them easier to control, because there is no greater tyranny than your own lusts. And
that's true enough.
And the state has much more power over you if you're enslaving yourself. They don't have to. They don't have to outright enslave you if you're totally addicted to, let's say, pornography, or you're on drugs, or like you're enslaved by a drug addiction or a sex addiction or something like that. I think it's called in Catholicism, it's called libido dominandi, the dominance of the libido, right? And so I do think that's kind of, there are sinister forces that do this, and it was an intentional thing that after World War II in Germany, they started introducing pornography into Germany during the Marshall Plan. It was actually like a part of that, and they could say, they would justify it by saying, look how free we are as compared to Soviet Russia or Eastern Germany, right, where they don't allow this at all, right? So he's in this environment where all of that is, it's extremely difficult for this for this guy, for the type of guy that he is. Just as it was extremely difficult for me to get my head around all that, because I was also being told how awful things were in the 50s and how strict everything was and how you couldn't indulge your like, people were telling you, sex is bad. Or what they're really telling you is lust is bad. Like, I mean, there's really only two reasons to. There's really only two forms of sex that are healthy. One is for procreation, and the other is for having a connection with somebody else that opens the door to your connection to all of life. Not to a connection where you're becoming obsessed with one person. That love that you have with another person should open a door to the rest of humanity. Like that you're unified. Your unification with this one person represents your unification with all people. And that's one of the reasons I think, like, when you do fall in love, you're much friendlier to everybody around you, right? Like, like you walk into a store and people just automatically smile at you, and there's kind of this magical, because you've opened yourself up, and you've let yourself leak out into the kind of collective humanity, that the core divinity in people. So indulging these one-off, one-night stand experiences, that's, yeah, they happen, and people have chemistry and things like that, and maybe they're not totally unhealthy, but I think in the main, 95% of the time, they are unhealthy. This is not good. It makes it more difficult for you to later on have a committed relationship, to have a marriage that works, if you've had a bunch of one night stands. I think that's kind of been scientifically proven to be the case. So it's I guess my point is, looking, we can't look at Franz Bieberkopf and kind of the horrible shit that he does every once in a while in a vacuum, because I think that definitely, and it wasn't just in Weimar Germany, it was in 20s America too. Anything goes. Sure. There was a hit song called Anything Goes. And the flappers and all that, it was kind of like, to me, it's kind of like a dry run or a tryout for the 60s and 70s, and the bad side of the 60s and 70s, I should say. But so we can't look at him in a vacuum, from this particular time and place, but at the same time, right. Doblin is giving us a timeless story, right? Like,
yes,
and,
definitely.
And again, I think that it's a timeless story in the sense that there's this battle between spirit and matter. This obvious, this old Gnostic thing. Just to put it in kind of a plain way, I've never really liked that idea of a conflict, because ultimately you've got to integrate the two things, and not look at it as a kind of conflict, which is probably the most difficult thing to do. But and I think I talked about this last time, this common man who's really, I was talking about how most people, they look at somebody as accomplished when they're materially accomplished, or they're accomplished in literature, or they're accomplished in art or something like that. But Franz Bieberkopf is a totally common, anonymous, kind of an
Yes.
amorphous guy that's doing something really remarkable and is going through something
Mm-hmm.
really remarkable, and that's one of the things that I really love about this story is that you don't know when you look at when you just meet somebody, the butcher in the grocery store, or the
Yep.
shoe salesman, or even the homeless guy on the street, like
Yep. Yep.
you don't know like how significant this guy really is, in a spiritual sense, like
True.
he's and I think that how should I say that, we get closer and closer to our own archetype, or as
Mm-hmm.
the Buddhists call it, dharma, I guess. We get closer and
Mm-hmm.
closer to that the more we progress through this story. We get closer to who Franz Bieberkopf really is, and
Mm-hmm.
he could be a god, like
Mm-hmm.
he could be a mythical figure that's going through this one thing where he's he's being laid on the anvil and he's being hammered out violently, or you could look at it as, he's being put into the forge and having the alloys burnt out from the gold, like he's being purified.
Mm-hmm.
He's being purified through the suffering, I guess, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think that's true, and I think that's very much the story that Doblin is giving us. Uh, uh, Fassbinder puts it in these lights and darks. For instance, the lights and darks of the scene where, in effect, Reinhold ambushes Mita in the hallway, and they had that conversation in chapter 11. The lights and darks of that visually are pretty amazing. And then when she and Franz are in the kitchen as this whole and kind of the ebbing of that terrible scene, the violence, outside, the light outside, the shades are drawn, it's night, is blinking on and off the whole time, and a flute plays one bar of music over and over and over and over and over again. It is hypnotic, but in terms of, but yes, it is Franz Bieberkopf going, this humble, insignificant person, insignificant in societal terms, going through this odyssey, literally, with all of these elements, and at the same time, looking at it as a human situation. All these other people, all these other characters, while I agree they have their symbolic purpose, are also presented as human beings.
Yeah.
Going through these what they're going through. They're not only it's as though Franz is the vortex, but they all revolve around him in some way. Because his search is so powerful. It's interesting. He's searching for something the others aren't. And that affects everybody around him in sort of in completely unconscious ways. I think this kind of segues into what you were talking about. An undercurrent of it. But yes, he's going through a mythic development. He becomes a figure of myth, and the people around him take on that character, those characteristics. But when you were talking about all these people, these humble people and you never know what worlds are contained in them. I grew up in New York City, and I remember being a boy on the subways. And I had to go to school by myself, so I had a subway pass. I was about 11. And I walked a few blocks to the subway, and I waited for the subway. I showed my pass, I got in. And it was only about 3 or 4 stops. And I got off at Jefferson Street to go to my junior high school, grade school, and junior high school. I did that. And I remember it struck me one day that everybody on the subway car had their own story. And it just blew me away. That all these people I was seeing, because in New York you're thrown together with people. In the New York of that day, I don't know about now. You're thrown together with people all the time, on the street, in the subway, in the bus. All kinds of people, all colors, and you can't avoid it. And thinking they all had their stories totally different from my story. Not so different, really, but I'd find that out later. But and then I heard that phrase, this is a little past that time when the announcer comes on, there are 8 million stories in the naked city, and this has been one of them. And it blew me away. But I think that's part of what you're saying, am I right?
Yeah. And I think that you can, at least in my life, I can tell how much somebody has suffered, and I get along with people that have suffered, and I have it's kind of like I have an instant dialogue with those people, and also a similar sense of humor with those people.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I wanted to say also, I think a lot of when it went into the political stuff, I think he was showing it as a manifestation of what's going on inside of France, or behind the scenes of this. It's like a manifestation of all these conflicts that are going on inside of people, a kind of like organic expression of those things, that these political conflicts are rooted in people's inner lives, and I think that's kind of what was sort of being gotten across in those political episodes. But and in a way, I think this whole thing is about France growing up and just not, because it keeps making reference to children, like in the signs, when he gets hit by that car and there's a sign behind the whole scene that says "the children of hell," and when he he goes to the bar, and the bar is called the Kinder Bar, or Kinder Berlin, Children of Berlin, when he goes to that political meeting, and then he's talking to that guy at the end of the meeting, and they're playing on the seesaw and on the swing,
Right.
And he is being taken care of, he's being taken care of by Ava and Herbert and Mrs. Bast, and they're kind of he's kind of in a cradle,
That's true.
He has
being taken care of by all those people.
He has all these supports, right? And you kind of look at the mystery of why he's attracted to Reinhold, right? Like why does he keep going back to Reinhold's apartment? In that first episode, in this, like in the episode 11 or whatever, it starts out with him knocking on Reinhold's door, and Reinhold's like, why do you keep coming back here?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want? And he tries to get to the point. He tries to bring up, just bring it out into the open. Like, look, man, like there's this thing that went on with you and me in the car, and I threw you out of the car, and all. And he's like, nah, that doesn't matter. can't do anything about that now,
Yes.
and Reinhold's kind of vexed, and I think that's Reinhold's personality, but then there's also this other kind of organic part of Reinhold that's there to as the anvil, like to just like dissipate anything that's going to. He's the destroyer, like he's the destroyer part of Vishnu, like he's getting rid of the obstacles to Franz's growth, and he's also making him suffer through it. And and it reminds me, the lady who pretty much used to take care of the lodge that I'm at, and her family's been a part of this of theosophy for like 100 years and everything, and when I first started going there, this kind of a similar thing started happening as with Franz. Like I dipped my toe in this like spiritual water, and then I started suffering. I was like, this isn't what's supposed to happen. Like I'm supposed to feel good or whatever, and I just started suffering really badly, and so one night after a meeting, I said to her, can I talk to you after the meeting, because I'm having a really hard time keeping it together. And I told her like what was going on with me and everything, and she looked at me and she says, "Oh, good, you're suffering." And I woke up with I kind of looked at her for a second in shock, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, now I kind of get it now," yeah, but I think all around that's kind of what's going on with Franz, and I'm not really looking at Reinhold as just this purely evil, destructive force. He's a tool. That's everybody is kind of like a tool in kind of fixing Franz and building the real Franz and bringing him to fruition. So yeah,
I like that vision of it very much. I think it's an elevated vision. Yeah, I just want to take the guy out.
Yeah, he's really an awful guy. Yeah.
But I know he's going to kill that girl. I just want to take him out. But I agree with you in the structure of the novel. That is what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think in individual lives that goes on in a certain sense for all of us. Everybody we become involved with, I think, in all kinds of ways. In the workplace, at home, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm talking to somebody in the park. We are all each other's teachers in that sense.
Right.
And that means testers too. So yes, I think it's a great way to look at it. And God knows we've gotten involved with it.
Yeah.
There aren't that many works you can spend this much time talking about.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's really been interesting watching it this time. It's weird how I'll watch it and then I have to watch it again because I kind of forget everything that happened. I don't know. It has a weird effect that way, where it's difficult to remember the specifics of what's going on until you kind of remind me of what it is. But yeah.
Well, I had that all those years as a film critic where I was going to write about these films, so right. I took notes. So I've been taking notes like crazy. Yeah. I've got let's see, my notes on this episode 11 started on page 46 of my notes. That's how many notes I had. Now I've got about I think about 20 pages of notes on scribbled hand, so it's not like small type. But and then before we talk, I review my notes, and that's the only way I can keep things in place. So and I am serious about doing the Marx Brothers after this.
Yeah.
because the Paramount Marx Brothers, the first 3 or 4 Marx Brothers were really crazy because they happened. They were produced in time at the same time that Berlin Alexanderplatz is going on.
Yeah, yeah.
At the same years. And so I'm interested if we make connections with that. That's really fascinating.